How do you feel when you finally revenge that one person who took away what you loved most in the world?
The air in the private dining room of the Gilded Lotus was heavy, not with the scent of spices or wine, but with the suffocating weight of power. Kang Dae sat at the head of the mahogany table, swirling a glass of amber whiskey that cost more than most people earned in a year. Around him, his lieutenants spoke in hushed, urgent tones about territory lines and shipping lanes, but Kang Dae wasn't listening. He was bored. The Seoul underworld had become predictable, a never-ending cycle of violence and negotiation that no longer made his pulse race. He leaned back, his dark eyes scanning the main floor of the restaurant through the one-way glass partition. The restaurant was a sanctuary for the elite, a place where business was conducted in whispers. His security detail, men with stone faces and concealed weapons, stood at the perimeter, invisible walls between him and the rest of the world. Then he saw her. She was sitting alone at a small table near the center of the room, distinct amidst a sea of gray suits and nervous laughter. She was a black woman with a presence that seemed to absorb the light around her, calm and terrifyingly still. She wasn't looking at her phone, nor was she looking at the menu. She was looking directly at the one-way glass. It was impossible for her to see him, yet he felt the weight of her gaze land squarely on his chest. It was a challenge. Kang Dae raised a hand, silencing his lieutenant mid-sentence. He watched as she raised a delicate hand, summoning a waiter. She scribbled something on a napkin, folded it once, and whispered to the server, gesturing toward the private room. The waiter looked terrified. He approached the security detail at the door, trembling as he spoke to the head guard. The guard frowned, took the napkin, and walked over to Kang Dae. "Sir," the guard said, his voice low, "a message from the woman in the center." Kang Dae took the napkin. The paper was thick, textured. He unfolded it slowly. There were no threats, no pleas for mercy, no business propositions, just two words written in elegant, sharp cursive. "I'm horny." A laugh, dark and genuine, bubbled up from his chest, startling his men. It had been years since anyone had dared to be so irreverent, so recklessly bold in his presence. He looked back through the glass. She was sipping her wine now, the glass tilted against her lips, her eyes still locked on his hidden position. She knew. She knew exactly who he was, and she didn't care. "Clear the room," Kang Dae ordered, standing up. "Sir?" his lieutenant asked, confused. "The negotiation regarding the—" "I said clear the room," Kang Dae repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And bring her in." The men scrambled to pack up their documents. Within moments, the room was empty, save for Kang Dae. The heavy oak doors opened, and the guard ushered her inside. She walked in with a slow, predatory grace. Up close, her energy was magnetic. She didn't bow, she didn't tremble. She simply walked to the other end of the long table and pulled out a chair, sitting down as if she owned the building. "You have a very direct way of communicating," Kang Dae said, remaining standing, his hands resting on the back of his chair. "Time is a currency I don't like to waste, and you look like you were dying of boredom. I thought I'd offer a lifeline." Kang Dae walked slowly around the table, closing the distance between them. He stopped a few feet from her. The air between them crackled with a sudden, violent tension. It wasn't just lust. It was a recognition of danger. She was playing a game, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't know the rules. "And you think you are that surprised?" Kang Dae asked. She stood up, closing the final gap between them. She didn't touch him, but the heat radiating from her was palpable. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable, masking a depth of calculation he couldn't yet see. "I'm not the surprise, Kang Dae," she whispered, using his name with a familiarity that should have been a death sentence. "I'm the event." Kang Dae smiled, a shark sensing blood in the water, unaware that he was the one bleeding. He gestured to the door. "Show me." The drive to Kang Dae's private residence was a study in silence. The interior of the armored SUV was hermetically sealed from the noise of Seoul, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows like blurred neon scars. She sat beside him, comfortable in the quiet, watching the city breathe. Most women would have filled the space with nervous chatter or questions about where they were going, but she remained perfectly still. It unsettled him, and he liked it. Kang Dae watched her reflection in the glass. He prided himself on being a judge of character. It was how he had survived this long. He categorized people into assets, threats, or cattle, but she didn't fit. She was too calm to be cattle, too seductive to be a blunt threat, and yet too unknown to be an asset. The car slowed, turning into the underground garage of a sleek glass needle skyscraper that pierced the clouds above the Han River. Private elevators waited. His security detail stayed behind at the lobby level, a testament to his arrogance, or perhaps his desire to be alone with her. As the elevator ascended, the pressure changed, ears popping with the altitude. When the doors slid open, they revealed a penthouse that was less a home and more a fortress of glass and steel. The view was commanding, looking down on the sprawling metropolis as if it were a game board. "Drink?" Kang Dae asked, moving toward a crystal decanter on a floating shelf. "Something sharp," she replied, wandering toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Vodka. Neat." He poured 2 glasses and walked over to her. She didn't turn around immediately. She was pressing her hand against the cold glass, looking down at the streets below. "You live high up," she murmured. "Hard for anyone to reach you here." "That's the point," Kang Dae said, handing her the glass. "Perspective. From up here, the problems of the streets look like ants, insignificant." She turned, taking the glass, her fingers brushing against his. The contact sent a jolt through him. Ants have a way of toppling structures if there are enough of them, or if they find the cracks in the foundation. Kang Dae chuckled, taking a sip. "My foundation has no cracks. I built this city's underworld. I know where every beam is placed." "Is that so?" She took a slow sip, her eyes over the rim of the glass, dissecting him. "And yet you let a stranger into your home because of a note on a napkin. That seems like a crack to me." He stepped closer, invading her personal space, backing her slightly against the glass. The city lights framed her silhouette. "Calculated risk. Sometimes the danger is the appeal. You aren't just a random stranger, though. You carry yourself like a soldier." "A survivor," she corrected softly. "There's a difference." He took the glass from her hand and set it on a nearby table, never breaking eye contact. The air grew heavy, charged with the promise made back in the restaurant. He reached out, his hand tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was possessive, the touch of a man used to taking whatever he wanted. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice rough. "Simone," she lied. The name rolled off her tongue effortlessly, a mask she had worn for months in preparation for this moment. "Simone," he repeated, testing the weight of it. "You said you were the event. Prove it." She didn't hesitate. She moved in, closing the distance. Her confidence overwhelmed his natural instinct for self-preservation. When she kissed him, it wasn't tentative. It was a conquest. She kissed him with a hunger that matched the note she had sent, but beneath the passion, her mind was ice cold. As they moved toward the master suite, stumbling slightly in their haste, Simone's eyes remained open for a fraction of a second longer than his. She scanned the room over his shoulder. She noted the keypad by the bedroom door. She noted the gun he placed on the nightstand, a custom piece, distinct. She noted the phone he left face down on the dresser. The night blurred into a haze of adrenaline and skin. Kang Dae, usually the one to dictate the pace, found himself unmoored. She was relentless, keeping him off balance, making him focus entirely on the sensation of her rather than the reality of the situation. She made him feel worshipped, a drug that fueled his ego and dulled his sharp edges. Hours later, the penthouse was silent. Kang Dae was asleep, his breathing deep and rhythmic, one arm thrown possessively over the space where she had been. But Simone was not asleep. She stood by the window in the living area, wrapped in a silk sheet she had pulled from the bed. She held a glass of water, staring at the reflection of the room behind her. The adrenaline had faded, replaced with a hollow, burning resolve. She walked silently back toward the bedroom, stopping at the doorway. She watched him sleep. To the world, he was a monster, a kingpin, a man who ordered deaths over dinner. To her, in this moment, he was just a man who had murdered her father 15 years ago in a botched extortion racket that Kang Dae probably didn't even remember. He called the people below ants. He had no idea that the queen of the colony was standing in his bedroom. She crept over to the nightstand. She didn't reach for the gun, not yet. That was too easy. Death was too quick for what he deserved. Instead, she picked up his phone. It was biometric, locked to his fingerprint. She looked at his sleeping hand hanging off the edge of the mattress. With steady hands like a surgeon, she gently lifted his thumb. She held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She guided his thumb to the sensor. Click. The screen lit up, unlocked. She didn't scroll, she didn't snoop through texts. She went straight to the settings and quickly paired the device with a microscopic drive she had concealed in her earring. It took 10 seconds to clone the encryption keys. She placed the phone back exactly as it was. Simone slipped back into the bed, curling up against the back of the man she intended to destroy. She closed her eyes, forcing her breathing to match his, waiting for the sun to rise on the beginning of his end. The sun was blinding when Kang Dae finally opened his eyes, a rare occurrence for a man who usually rose before dawn. He reached out instinctively, his hands sweeping across the sheets, but they were cool to the touch. The space beside him was empty. Panic, sharp and unfamiliar, spiked in his chest for a brief second before he heard the hum of the espresso machine in the kitchen. He walked out to find Simone leaning against the marble island, a cup of coffee in hand. She looked composed, entirely unaffected by the night that had left him feeling like he'd been hit by a freight train. "You're up," she said, her voice neutral. "I was about to leave." Kang Dae frowned, the fog of sleep vanishing instantly. "Leave? We haven't eaten. I can have the chef prepare whatever you want." "I don't do breakfast in bed, Kang Dae, and I don't stay past noon," she said, placing the empty cup in the sink. She moved toward the elevator, checking her phone. "I have a life outside of this penthouse." He moved to intercept her, grabbing her wrist gently but firmly. "You don't walk on me, not like this. When do I see you again?" She looked at his hands on his wrist, then up at his eyes. She didn't pull away, but her gaze hardened. "I'm not one of your employees you can summon, and I'm not a mistress you keep on a shelf. If you want to see me again, you'll wait until I'm ready." She pulled her arm free, stepped into the elevator, and the doors slid shut, severing the connection. Kang Dae stood there, frustrated and intrigued. He was used to women who clung to him for his money or feared him for his power. Simone did neither. She had just walked out on the most powerful man in Seoul, and that made him want her with a dangerous desperation. Simone didn't go home. She took a circuitous route, changing taxis 3 times to ensure she wasn't being followed. She ended up in a cramped, smoke-filled internet cafe in the back alleys of the Itaewon district. It was a stark contrast to the penthouse she had just left, smelling of stale noodles and ozone. She found a private booth in the back and plugged the drive from her earring into a battered terminal. The cloning software she had installed on his phone the night before had done its job. As the files cascaded across the screen, her eyes scanned the data with rapid precision. She ignored the bank accounts. Stealing money was petty theft, and she was here for an empire. She was looking for leverage. She sifted through encrypted messages, call logs, and hidden memos. Then she found it. It was a series of audio files recorded 3 days ago, a conversation between Kang Dae and a corrupt government official. Simone put on the headphones and listened. "The docs are becoming a liability," Kang Dae's voice said on the recording. "My chief of operations, Jun Sung, he's too old school. He refuses to move the fentanyl. He has a code." "So what is the solution?" the official asked. "I'm meeting him Thursday at the warehouse in District 9. We'll retire him permanently. Then the new shipments can begin." Simone stopped the recording. She sat back, a cold smile touching her lips. Jun Sung, she knew him by reputation. He was the muscle behind the organization, the man who commanded the loyalty of the foot soldiers. He was old guard, honorable in his own twisted way, and fiercely loyal to Kang Dae. And Kang Dae was going to slaughter him like a pig. This was the crack in the foundation she had promised. 2 hours later, Simone was sitting in the back of a dimly lit tea house in the Old Quarter. Across from her sat a mountain of a man, his face scarred and weary, Jun Sung. Getting the meeting was difficult. She had to use a phrase from the stolen data to even get his attention. "You have 5 minutes," Jun-sung grunted, his hand resting near his waist, undoubtedly on a weapon. Who are you? Simone said, I'm the woman who slept in your boss's bed last night, and I'm the woman who knows you're going to die on Thursday. Jun-sung laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Kang Dae is my brother. We built this city together. If you're trying to sell me lies, I'll cut your tongue out. Simone didn't flinch. She slid a burner phone across the table. Play the audio file. Jun-sung stared at her, then at the phone. He picked it up and pressed play. As Kang Dae's voice filled the silence between them, discussing Jun-sung's retirement and the introduction of drugs Jun-sung had forbidden, the color drained from the big man's face. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. It was deep. The recording ended. Jun-sung crushed the plastic phone in his hand, his breathing heavy and ragged. He looked up at Simone, his eyes burning with a murderous rage that was no longer directed at her. Why tell me, he hissed. What do you want? I want what you want, Simone said, leaning forward. Kang Dae has lost his way. He forgets who keeps his throne steady. You have the men. You have the loyalty of the streets. He just has the money. You want me to kill him? No, Simone said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Martyrs are dangerous. If you kill him, the other families will attack in the chaos. I don't want chaos. I want a transition. What are you proposing? Thursday, Simone said. Go to the warehouse, but don't go alone. And when the moment comes, you don't pull the trigger. You let me handle the king. You just make sure his guards look the other way. Jun-sung studied her for a long moment. He saw the ambition in her eyes, the steel that matched his own. He realized that this woman wasn't just a messenger. She was a strategist. And what do you get out of this? Jun-sung asked, standing up to leave. When the dust settles, I get the chair at the head of the table, and you get to keep your honor and your life. Jun-sung remained silent, but he gave a single curt nod. The alliance was formed. The queen had just captured the night. The days leading up to Thursday blurred into a dangerous dance of intimacy and deception. Simone returned to the penthouse that evening, and Kang Dae, despite his paranoia, welcomed her back with a hunger that bordered on obsession. He was a man used to controlling every variable in his life, yet she remained the one equation he couldn't solve. That mystery was her greatest shield. By Wednesday night, the tension in Kang Dae was palpable. He paced the length of his living room, a tumbler of whiskey in hand, staring out at the city he believed he owned. Simone sat on the sofa, watching him over the rim of a book she wasn't reading. You're restless, she observed, her voice cutting through the silence. Kang Dae stopped pacing and looked at her. Heavy is the head, he muttered, finishing the drink in one swallow. Tomorrow, I make a change, a necessary correction to the organization's trajectory. The rotting limb you mentioned? She asked, referencing a vague comment he'd made earlier. Precise, he nodded. Loyalty is a currency, Simone. When it devalues, you have to cut your losses before it bankrupts you. Jun-sung, he thinks he is the moral compass of this family. He forgets that compasses don't build empires. Ruthlessness does. Simone felt a cold spike in her chest at the mention of Jun-sung's name, but her face remained a mask of bored curiosity. And you're going to do it yourself? She asked, refining her interests and undercutting Ba's arrogance. Of course, Kang Dae said, his voice dripping with arrogance. A king must wield the sword occasionally, lest his subjects forget he knows how to use it. She stood up, walking over to him, placing a hand on his chest. She could feel his heart beating, steady, strong, unaware that it was counting down its final beats. Take me with you, she whispered. Kang Dae laughed, shaking his head. To a warehouse in District 9? It's not a place for you. It'll be messy. Violence isn't a spectator sport. You said I liked danger, she countered, her eyes locking onto his. You said I was the event. If you want me to understand who you are, truly, then show me. Don't hide me in this glass tower while you go play God. Let me see the God in action. It was a stroke of genius. She targeted his vanity. Kang Dae looked at her, his eyes darkening. He saw her request not as a liability, but as a form of submission. She wanted to witness his power. He wanted to show off. "Fine," he said, gripping her waist. "But you stay in the car until I say otherwise. You watch from the glass, just like at the restaurant. You watch me end an era." Thursday morning arrived with a gray, suffocating sky. The convoy of black SUVs moved like a funeral procession through the industrial district. The warehouse was a relic of a bygone industrial boom, rusting and abandoned. Inside the lead car, Kang Dae checked his weapon, a ritualistic silence filling the cabin. Simone sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't praying, she was counting. "Jun Sung is already inside," the intercom crackled. "Good," Kang Dae said. He looked at Simone. "Stay here. Watch." He opened the door and stepped out into the damp air. His security detail fanned out as he walked toward the massive sliding metal doors of the warehouse. Simone watched him go. As soon as he was clear of the vehicle, she leaned forward to the driver. "Open the door," she commanded. The driver hesitated. "Boss said..." "The boss is walking into a room with a man he intends to kill. If things go wrong, do you want to be the one explaining why you left his backup in the car?" The driver, confused by her sudden shift in demeanor, hit the unlock button. Simone stepped out. She didn't stay back. She followed Kang Dae at a distance, moving silently through the shadows of the industrial yard. Inside the warehouse, the air smelled of rust and oil. Jun Sung stood in the center of the vast, empty space. He was alone, or so it seemed. His hands were empty, held out to his sides. Kang Dae walked in, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. He stopped 10 yards away, his guards raising their weapons. "Jun Sung," Kang Dae said, his voice echoing. "You look tired, old friend." "I am tired, Kang Dae," Jun Sung replied, his voice gravelly but steady. "Tired of watching you poison the city we swore to protect." "Protection is a myth," Kang Dae sneered. "Power is reality. You've become a liability. You're blocking the future." "And the future is fentanyl?" Jun Sung asked, disappointment etching his face. "Killing kids for profit?" "Profit is profit," Kang Dae said, raising his gun. "Goodbye, brother." Kang Dae pulled the trigger. Click. The sound was deafening in its smallness. Kang Dae frowned, looking at his custom pistol. He racked the slide, a live round ejected, bouncing on the floor. He aimed again. Click. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced his arrogance. He turned to his guards. "Kill him," he screamed, his voice cracking. "They won't," a voice called out from behind him. Kang Dae swung around. Simone stepped into the light. She wasn't looking at him with lust anymore. She was looking at him with the cold, detached judgment of an executioner. "Why?" Kang Dae whispered, the reality crashing down on him. "Who are you?" "I told you," she said, walking past his frozen guards to stand beside Jun Sung. "I'm the event." The silence in the warehouse was absolute, broken only by the sharp, ragged breathing of a man who had just realized he was alone in a room full of people. Kang Dae looked from Jun Sung to his guards, then back to Simone. His mind raced, trying to find the angle, the bribe, the threat that would turn the tide back in his favor, but the faces surrounding him were made of stone. "You think they'll follow you?" Kang Dae snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Jun Sung. "I made them rich. I gave them everything." "You gave them orders to kill their own kind," Jun Sung replied, his voice heavy with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You forgot, Kang Dae. We built this family on protection, not poison. When you decided to flood our streets with fentanyl, you broke the covenant. I didn't have to buy their loyalty. I just had to remind them of who we used to be." Kang Dae lunged for the guard nearest him, desperate to grab a working weapon. Before he could take 2 steps, Jun Sung moved with a speed that belied his size. He struck Kang Dae hard across the chest, sending the smaller man sprawling backward onto the dirty concrete floor. The gun Kang Dae had tried to use skittered away into the darkness. Simone didn't flinch. She walked slowly toward where Kang Dae lay, gasping for air. She looked down at him, her expression stripped of all the seduction and warmth she had manufactured over the last few days. All that remained was a cold, sharp intelligence. "My gun," Kang Dae wheezed, clutching his ribs. "It was loaded. I checked it." "You checked the magazine," Simone corrected softly, towering over him. "You didn't check the firing pin. I removed it while you were sleeping this morning, right before I made you coffee." Kang Dae stared up at her, the betrayal cutting deeper than any knife. "Who are you? Truly, no one does this for a stranger." 15 years ago, Simone began, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You wanted to expand your territory into the foreign district. There was a man who ran a small logistics company. He refused to launder your money. He stood up to you." Kang Dae frowned, searching his memory, but coming up blank. To him, the past was just a series of transactions. "You don't remember him," Simone said, a bitter smile touching her lips. "I knew you wouldn't. He was an obstacle to you, an ant. But he was my father. You had him executed in his office while I hid in the closet and listened. You walked out, stepped over his body, and complained that your shoes were dirty." The color drained from Kang Dae's face. The ghost he hadn't even bothered to remember had come back to haunt him. "I spent 15 years studying you," she continued, circling him like a shark. "I learned your business better than you know it yourself. I learned your weaknesses. I learned that your ego was the only thing bigger than your empire. And I knew that if I offered you a challenge, you wouldn't be able to resist." "So kill me," Kang Dae spat, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. "Finish it. If you leave me alive, I will burn this city to the ground to find you." Simone laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She looked at Junsung. "He thinks he still has matches," she said. Junsung stepped forward, pulling a tablet from his coat. He tapped the screen and turned it toward Kang Dae. It showed a series of bank transfers, rapid, massive, and irreversible. "While we were driving here," Simone explained, "the clone of your phone authorized the transfer of your offshore accounts to a decentralized network. Your assets are gone. Your properties are being seized by the authorities as we speak, thanks to an anonymous tip about the fentanyl shipments, the ones Junsung never touched." Kang Dae scrambled up to his knees, staring at the screen. Zero. Everything was zero. "You're not going to die today, Kang Dae." Simone leaned down until she was inches from his face. "Death is too easy. It's too quick. You're going to live." She straightened up and turned her back on Kang Dae. "You're going to live in a city that used to bow to you, with nothing in your pockets but the dust from this floor. You're going to watch us run your empire properly." She signaled to Junsung. "Let's go." Junsung nodded to the guards. They lowered their weapons and turned in unison, falling in line behind Simone and the big man. They walked toward the exit, the heavy steel doors rumbling open to reveal the gray light of day. Kang Dae sat alone in the center of the warehouse, a king without a crown, a millionaire without a dime, screaming into the silence as the doors began to close, sealing him in with his failure. 3 months had passed since the heavy steel doors of the warehouse slammed shut. The Gilded Lotus was buzzing with life, but the atmosphere inside had shifted. The suffocating fear that used to choke the air was gone, replaced by a respectful, quiet intensity. The patrons still whispered, but they no longer looked over their shoulders. Simone sat at the head of the mahogany table in the private dining room. It was the same seat Kang Dae had occupied the night she first saw him, but she didn't lounge with bored arrogance. She sat with the posture of a CEO, her hands resting on a stack of ledgers that were now entirely digital and entirely clean. Junsung sat to her right. He looked different, lighter, despite the heavy responsibility resting on his broad shoulders. The scar on his face seemed less like a mark of brutality and more like a badge of survival. "The transition is complete," Junsung said, sliding a sleek tablet across the polished wood. "The other families have accepted the terms. The fentanyl distribution is dead. We've pivoted back to logistics, high-stakes gambling, and corporate protection. The revenue is down 12% from Kang Dae's peak, but the heat from the authorities has vanished." Simone tapped the screen, scrolling through the numbers with a critical eye. 12% is the cost of doing business without blood on our hands. We'll make it back in stability. And the dissenters? Handled, Junsung replied, simply. They realized quickly that loyalty to a ghost doesn't pay the bills. The foot soldiers are happier. They get paid on time, and they don't have to look over their shoulders for their own boss. Simone nodded, satisfied. She picked up a glass of wine, a vintage she had chosen, distinct and bold. She looked through the one-way glass at the restaurant floor below. It was full. "And him?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. She didn't look at Junsung. Her gaze remained fixed on the world she now controlled. Junsung didn't need to ask who she meant. He was seen in the underground metro station in District 4 yesterday. He tried to sell a watch to a tourist, but it was a fake, one of the knockoffs he used to flood the market with. He's sleeping in a shelter near the river. He screams at people who walk by, telling them he owns the city. Does anyone believe him? No, Junsung said, shaking his head. They just think he's another madman lost to the bottle. He is invisible. Simone took a slow sip of wine. It tasted like victory. Not the fiery, adrenaline-fueled victory of a shootout, but the slow, sweet burn of absolute justice. She had stripped him of his name, his money, and his mind. She had turned the king into a beggar. Keep watching him, she ordered softly. Make sure he stays alive. Death is a release. Obscurity is a prison. I want him to live a long, empty life, knowing exactly who took his crown. Understood, Junsung said. He hesitated for a moment, reaching into his pocket. There is one more thing. The cleaning staff found this in his old jacket pocket when we cleared out the penthouse. I thought you should decide what to do with it. He slid a small folded napkin across the table. Simone stared at it. The paper was worn, fuzzy at the edges from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. She reached out and opened it. I'm horny. The ink was faded, a relic of a game played by a different woman in a different life. It was the only thing he had kept, the bait that had hooked the shark. It was proof that his vanity had been his undoing. Simone smiled, a genuine, terrifying expression. She took a gold lighter from the table, flicked the flame to life, and held it to the corner of the napkin. They watched in silence as the paper pearled and blackened, the words disappearing into ash. She dropped the burning remnant into a crystal ashtray and watched the last wisp of gray smoke curl toward the ceiling fan. The past is dust, Simone said, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked the restaurant floor. She looked out at the skyline of Seoul, the lights blinking like a million eyes looking back at her. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She wasn't just a daughter avenging a father. She was the architect of a new world. She turned back to Junsung, her eyes sharp and clear. Ready the car, she said. We have work to do. Simone walked out of the room, leaving the ashes behind, stepping into the future she had built from the ruins of his empire. Now that Simone sits on the throne she built from the ashes of revenge, I have a question for you. Do you think she broke the cycle of corruption by taking over, or is she destined to become exactly like the monster she destroyed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.
Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel.